Hello friends. So as we discussed yesterday, so today we are talking about the chemistry, the basic chemistry, just to understand uh, the atoms, neutrons, protons, the molecules, substances, elements, because like that will be really important to understand the cell and the physiology of the human being. So as you know, like the chemical component of cell, the smallest particle of an element that still retain its distinctive chemical property is an atom. So when we supposed to describe or define an atom, so what is an atom? So the smallest particle of an element that still retains its chemical distinctive chemical properties is an atom. So the characteristics of substances other than pure elements, including the materials from which the living cells are made, depends on which atom they contain and the way these atoms are linked together in the groups to form the molecules. So to understand living organism, it is really crucial to understand how the chemical bonds that hold atoms together in the molecules are formed. So that's why we will just discuss some of the basic chemistry. So, and the cells are made relatively few types of atoms, not so many atoms. So each atom, like what is atom? Now, when we discuss about atom, so what is an atom? Each atom has at its center a dense, positively charged nucleus, as you can see in this picture. So the atom that has a dense, positively charged nucleus and is surrounded at some distance by a cloud of negatively charged electrons, held there by an electrostatic attraction to the nucleus. So this is an atom. It has a central nucleus with a positive charge and is surrounded by a negatively charged electrons. So the nucleus consists of two kinds of subatomic particle. The nucleus, that's the center part of that atom. So it has two kinds of subatomic particles. So that are protons, which are positively charged, and neutrons, which are electrically neutrals. So the number of protons present in an atom's nucleus determine the atomic number of its atomic number. So the number of protons present in an atom's determine its atomic number. So when you think about what's an atomic number, so you just think that's the number of proton in an atom. Like for example, if you see an hydrogen atom, so it's composed of just a single proton. So that's the atomic number 1, and it's the lightest element. An atom of carbon has 6 protons in its nucleus, and so the atomic number of carbon is 6. The electric charge carried by each proton is exactly equal and opposite to the charge carried by a single electron. Because the whole atom is electrically neutral, the number of negatively charged electrons surrounding the nucleus is equal to the number of positively charged protons that the nucleus contains. Thus, the number of electrons in an atom also equals the atomic number. So the same as the proton, because they are exactly the same number. All atoms of a given element have the same atomic number, and we'll see shortly that it is this number that dictates each atom's chemical behavior. Neutrons have essentially the same mass as protons. The neutrons contribute to the structural stability of the nucleus. If there are too many or too few, the nucleus may disintegrate by radioactive decay, but they do not alter the chemical properties of the atom. So the neutrons contribute to the stability of the nucleus. Thus, an element like can exist in several physically distinguishable but chemically identical form. That is called an isotope. So you heard about the isotope. So what is isotope? So an element can exist in a several physically distinguishable but chemically identical form that are called isotope, each having a different number of neutrons but the same number of protons. Right? So the multiple isotopes of almost all the elements occur naturally, including some that are unstable and thus radioactive. For example, when you see carbon on Earth exist as the stable isotope carbon 12 with 6 protons and 6 neutrons. So that's why it's called carbon 12. Also present a small amount of an unstable isotope, that's carbon 14, which has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. Carbon 14 undergoes radioactive decay at a slow but steady rate, which allows archaeologists to estimate the age of organic material. The atomic weight of an atom, or the molecular weight of a molecule, as its mass related to that of a hydrogen atom. So what is an atomic weight or a molecular weight of a molecule? So the atomic weight of an atom or a molecular weight of a molecule is its mass related to a hydrogen atom. So this is essentially equal to the number of protons plus neutrons that the atom or a molecule contains, because the electrons are so light that they contribute almost nothing to the total mass. So what is an atomic weight or a molecular weight? So it's equal to the number of protons plus the neutrons. So like as we see, the carbon has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. So that's total is 12. So the major isotope of the carbon has an atomic weight of 12. And it's written as like this. The mass of an atom or a molecule is generally specified in daltons. 1 dalton being an atomic mass unit approximately equal to the mass of a hydrogen atom. So the mass of an atom is generally specified. What's the unit for the mass of an atom is specified in daltons. Atoms are so small that it is hard to imagine their size. So we saw the atomic number, atomic weight. Now if we think about the size of an atom, so the atoms are so small that it's hard to imagine their size. Like an individual carbon atom is roughly 0.2 nanometers in diameter, so that it would take about 5 million of them if you laid out in a straight line to span a millimeter. So like just you can imagine how small are they. Like it will be like around 5 million of them to span a millimeter. 1 proton or neutron weighs approximately 1 by 6 into 12 by 10 by 23 gram. So the 1 proton or neutron weighs approximately 1 by 6 times 10 by 23 gram. So as hydrogen has only 1 proton, thus an atomic weight of 1 gram of hydrogen contains 6 times 10 by 23 atoms. So like how many atoms the hydrogen contains? As hydrogen has 1 proton, so the atomic weight of 1 gram of hydrogen. So the 1 gram of hydrogen contains 6 times 10 by 23 atoms. And this big number, huge number, is called Avogadro's number, allows us to relate everyday quantities of chemicals to the number of individual atoms or molecules. If a substance has a molecular weight of m grams of the substance will contain 6 times 10 by 23 molecules. This quantity is called 1 mole of the substance. The concept of mole is used widely in chemistry as a way to represent the number of molecules that are available to participate in the chemical reaction. The living organisms, however, are made of only a small selection of the elements. So like if you see, there are about 90 naturally occurring elements, each differing from others in the number of protons and electrons in its atom. But the living organisms are made of just only few small selection of these elements. That is just 4 of which carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen and oxygen constitute 96% of an organism's weight. So our living organism has 96% of only the 4 selection of elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen and oxygen. Now we will discuss about the electrons. So the outermost electrons determine how atoms react. We see the protons, the neutrons, and now we'll see the electrons. So the outermost electrons determines how atoms interact. Protons and neutrons are welded tightly to one another in an atom's nucleus. They change partners only under extreme condition during radioactive decay, for example, or in the interior of the sun of a nucleus reactor. So like in the nucleus, there is a proton and the neutron. So but like protons and neutrons are really tightly held together, and so they do not change their partners. And they change the partners, it's just under any extreme condition. So like in living tissues, only the electrons of an atoms undergo rearrangements. Electrons are in continuous motions around the nucleus. As you know, electrons are continuous motion around the nucleus, but the motions on this submicroscopic scale obey different laws from those we are familiar with in the everyday life. So this law dictates that the electrons in an atom can exist only in certain discrete region of movement, roughly speaking, in a discrete orbit. So moreover, there is a strict limit to the number of electrons that can accommodate in an orbit of a given type, a so-called electron shell. So as you can see this in this picture, so there is a nucleus, and there the orbit has the electron, so that's a discrete orbit. And so the electron closest on average to the positive nucleus are attracted most strongly to it and occupy the innermost tightly bound shell. This innermost shell can hold a maximum of 2 electrons. So as you can see, this is the first shell, and that holds just about 2 electrons, not more than 2. The second shell is farther away from the nucleus and can hold up to 8 electrons. The third shell can also hold up to 8 electrons, which are even less tightly bound. And the fourth and fifth cells can hold up to 18 electrons each. So this is how electrons are in the orbits. So the arrangement of electrons in an atom is most stable when all electrons are in the most tightly bound states that are possible for them. That is when they occupy the innermost cell closest to the nucleus. So this means that if the innermost orbit needs 2 electrons, and if it's just 1, so that's not a stable state. It's unstable because it requires 2 to tightly bound. So like the innermost, as the first orbit needs 2, then the second needs 8, third and also need 8 elements, so and so on. An atom whose outermost shell is entirely filled with electron is specially stable and therefore chemically unreactive. So if the outermost shell is completely filled, so they cannot react with anything because they become stable. So like for example, if you see helium with 2 electrons, the atomic number is 2, and like if it has 2 electrons, the outermost shell can contain only 2 electrons, so that it cannot have any other electrons furthermore. So neon with 2 plus 8 electrons and an argon with 2 plus 8 plus 8 electrons, these are called inert gases. So that is the reason that they are called inert gases. Alright, and you can see in this picture, so it represents the chemical bonds and the atomic numbers and how many electrons in the outer shell they has. So that goes by the end. So the hydrogen by contrast has only 1 electron, which leaves its outermost shell half filled, so it is highly reactive. The atoms that are found in the living organism all have the outermost cells that are incompletely filled. As you can see, like we have sodium, potassium, calcium, so all have the outermost cell incompletely filled, and they are therefore able to react with one another to form molecules. Because an incompletely filled electron shell is less stable than one that is completely filled, atoms with incomplete outer shells have a strong tendency to interact with other atoms so as to either gain or lose enough electron to achieve a completed outermost shell. So because the atom which has an incomplete filled outer shell, so it is like really wants to gain or lose an atom to complete its outer shell and just make it an stable atom. So this electron exchange can be achieved either by transferring electrons from one atom to another or by sharing electrons between two atoms. So these two strategies generate two types of chemical bonds that bind atoms to one another. An ionic bond is formed when electrons are donated by one atom to another, whereas a covalent bond is formed when two atoms share a pair of electrons. So in chemistry, as you know, there are how the bonds are generated. We'll see that later on. But there are two strategies that creates two types of chemical bonds. That one is an ionic bond and the other is a covalent bond. And when you see what is an ionic bond, so it's formed when an electron are donated by one atom to another, and when a covalent bond is formed when two atoms share a pair of electrons. Like an hydrogen atom, which needs only one more electron to complete its outer shell, generally acquires it by sharing, forming one covalent bond with another atom. If like two hydrogen bonds join together from one atom, and it shares the electron and it completes its outer cells. The other most common elements in living cell like carbon, nitrogen and oxygen, which have incomplete second shell, and the potassium and sulfur, which have an incomplete third shell, generally share electrons and achieve a filled outer shell of 8 electrons by forming several covalent bonds. The number of electrons an atom must acquire or lose, either by sharing or by transfer to attain the filled outer shell, determines the number of bonds that the atom can make. Right? The number of electrons an atom must acquire or lose, so that attains a filled outer shell, determines the number of bonds the atom can make. Because the state of an outer electron shell determines the chemical properties of an element, so when the elements are listed in order of their atomic number, we see a periodic recurrence of elements with similar properties, and elements with, say, an incomplete second shell containing one electron will behave in much the same way as an element that has filled its second shell and has an incompleted third shell containing one electron. Alright, I think that's too much chemistry for today. So in the next video, we'll see the different types of bond, covalent bonds and ionic bonds in much detail. Don't worry, we are still learning physiology, definitely, but we are just going through the basic chemistry to understand the things much more clearly. Alright guys, thank you guys for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe my channel.